Phil, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. Just a little quick story of how I came across your work. I was sitting there on LinkedIn like I do most days, and I saw a pop-up, and I wasn't quite sure what the pop-up was for what event, and if it was a LinkedIn Live, and I clicked on it for some reason, and what stood out, just the words of emotional intelligence. And that is something that's, that concept is something that's been sort of circulating my consciousness for quite a while now. And so I started to listen, it was like everything that you were saying was speaking so very directly to me, and kind of what I've been experiencing in my life, in my career. But one of the interesting things is that there's this notion that I've grown up with, and I'm only almost 42. So I don't, I got only probably about 2 decades. So, sort of a limited sample size there. But I've always been told that there's this separation, right, between church and state, or, your personal life and your business life. And frankly, I haven't been able to do that. Like, my identity was so tied to who I was as a business person. And I would say the last 4 years or so, give or take 4 or 5 years, outside of even this whole like thing that happened on our planet, um, really started to drive me the last couple of years to looking inside to what really motivated me, because I always thought it was about like financial success and all these things. But even underneath that, and what you were speaking to was so specific to me, or at least it was resonating so deeply with me. And I remember jumping on and asking you a couple questions, and I literally was like, Phil, and we'd never met. It's the first time we've actually met, because it was an audio event, sort of quote unquote face to face. And it was so helpful. And I remember you just saying one specific thing, and then we can go into your intro here for the audience. But I'm so grateful to have you on. But one of the things that you said was like, your desire to be liked by everyone is a problem, right? And boy, I remember that, and it hit home, and it just sort of, mapped to so many reasons why I've suffered, or even had taken action or in the past. But anyways, thank you so much, Phil. Why don't we take a second to kind of introduce you, and just tell us a little bit about your career background, and how did you embark on this journey, what I consider the most important work in our planet right now.
Thanks, George. It's great to meet you finally, and to be on your podcast. So thank you very much. I started on this journey 55 years ago. I'm 70 years old, and I was born with dyslexia. And that back in those days, there was no such thing as dyslexia, ADD, or ADHD. But it forced me to do a lot of what I refer to now as emotional labor. And that helped to create the awareness in me that enables me to do what I've been doing for the last 23 years. I've been an executive coach, working with executives and organizations all over the world, to help them to succeed, both in their career and their personal life, and in their businesses. Prior to that, I was an executive in the semiconductor industry for about 20 years. I worked I was traveling about 60,000 miles per year throughout North America and the Pacific Rim. So that's quite a story. As I started out, I grew up in about a 900 square foot wartime bungalow with 2 older brothers and a mom and a dad that were born in 1908 and 1909. That went as far as grade 8 in school. And I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 5 and was labeled a slow learner. So my mother died on December 3rd, 1967, and in January of 1968, I decided I wanted to do this work. I kind of became a super overachiever. I became an A student throughout the rest of grade school and high school. I went on and got the top of my class in the DeGroote School of Business at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. I studied electrical engineering for 5 years, and I've helped organizations generate over $1.5 billion in revenue. Um, so, there. Written lots of books, over 5,000 articles. I've been a guest on over 100 podcasts like this in the last 18 months, talking about the value and importance of emotional intelligence. I have my own podcast called The Master of Business Leadership with over 200 episodes. So I'm extremely passionate about the work I do, and I try as much as possible to help people understand the value and importance of developing their emotional intelligence.
Well, why don't we take a quick second to, for the folks out there, define what emotional intelligence is?
Sure. A very simple initial explanation about what emotional intelligence is it's the ability to feel the fear and anxiety that change and innovation always triggers in us, and be able to move through it towards what it is we're trying to achieve, as opposed to allowing that fear to keep us trapped in our comfort zones.
Wow. Now, do you think that fear and anxiety is a natural occurrence? You know, there's been so much, and I know I say that out loud, and I go, in my mind, I go, yeah, of course. But there's such a negative stigma, I think, historically around anxiety, for example, and there's a whole diagnosis and, you know, medication and all this stuff that's really emerged over the last, 30, 40 years. Yet it seems to be this natural sort of forcing function in nature. But the question is, how do we actually, like, you know, be able to develop a balance or a keen mastery of that, of what's going on, and use it? Or I know I've heard the word transmute it into something that is, I don't know, I hate to say positive, but I would just maybe start with that categorization, something that's positive and productive.
Fear is not the problem. There's nothing wrong with being afraid. But there's fear that's it's not a good idea to step out in front of a bus in traffic. That's a good fear to have. But there's also psychological fear that's largely ego-based, which we need to learn to be able to feel and move through in order to achieve better results. See, there's a part of our old lizard brain called the amygdala that for the last 500 million years has been trying to keep us safe by making sure we never leave the security of our cave or comfort zone. And if we do, it automatically secretes a hormone into our bloodstream called cortisol, and that causes the executive center of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, to shut off, and we go into what psychologists refer to as an amygdala hijack. Some people lash out, some people run away, some people freeze like a deer in the headlights. And when that happens in conflict situations, people die. When it happens in business or personal situations, relationships die. We burn trust. So as an analogy, if you think of your amygdala as a very frightened 4-year-old child, the development of our emotional intelligence acts like a big brother or a big sister to quiet that amygdala response down and better enable us to feel the fear and anxiety that change always triggers in us, and be able to move through it towards what it is we're trying to achieve, as opposed to allowing that fear to keep us trapped in our comfort zone.
Now, in terms of breaking out of your comfort zone, we talk a lot about success in business. And as we were prepping for this conversation, you had posted a question here in our sort of internal chat. And it was, what if you could guarantee success in your career, success in your personal life, and success in your business? And what if you could guarantee that success would increase exponentially over time for the rest of your life? And you asked me if I thought that was a true statement, and you know, I didn't quite know how to answer. I thought it was an awesome statement and something that I would love. And you had mentioned that's an absolutely true statement. Maybe we can expand on that.
Sure. It's absolutely true. And what stands in our way is our resistance to change. We don't like change, whether it's good or bad. We don't like change. We have both biological and sociological resistance to change. So there's two biological sources of resistance we have to change. The one I mentioned, the amygdala, is one. The other one is our existing habits. Once we develop a habit, it's there forever. It's a neural network pathway in our brain that we've created based on our actions. And although we can develop new habits at any age, it's called brain plasticity or neurogenesis, those new habits are always going to be weaker than the old habits, because when we're younger, there's an insulation layer that goes around the neural network pathway called myelin. And when we're younger, it's thicker than when we're older. So even though the new habits may work better than the old habits, there's going to be an ongoing internal battle between the old and new habits for dominance. The third source of resistance we have to change is sociological, meaning the people around us don't want us to change. Because if we change and start to get better results, maybe they're going to have to change, and that scares the heck out of them. And the best way to ensure they don't have to change is to make sure we fail. So they can say, look, I told you so, now get your head down and come back into the herd with the rest of us. So there's only two sources of motivation that will cause us to be willing to leave our comfort zone and go through the fear and anxiety that will trigger in us in order to achieve better results. One source is fear or pain. The other source is passion. And hardly anybody's connected with their passion, at least not initially. So the primary source for people that want better results, to motivate them to change, is fear, it's pain. And quite frankly, most people want better results than they're currently getting, but few people are in enough pain to be motivated to move outside of their comfort zone in the pursuit of better results. So if they're not willing to change themselves, the only other alternative they have is try and change everybody else. And that's what most people do. They try and use some type of position-based power to control, manipulate others to get them to change, because they're unwilling to change. And that's why the current level of employee engagement, according to Gallup, is around 13%. Low levels of employee engagement are costing the U.S. economy over $1 trillion a year. It's a massive problem. And it's going to get worse because we're facing a tsunami of accelerating global change with a 500 million year old brain that doesn't like change. Some scientists estimate in this century we could experience the equivalent of 20,000 years worth of change or 200 centuries worth of change. That has never happened before. That has never come close to happening before. And we are completely unprepared for the fear and anxiety that's going to trigger in us. So we really need to be developing our emotional intelligence to be able to navigate our way through that tsunami of change we're facing.
Well, I think we're seeing that, right, in the world. I mean, I just think about the last 10 years between
Yeah.
technology and
What we're seeing now is nothing. It's literally nothing compared to what's coming down the road. Um, we're dealing with things like CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing technology, where a grade 10 science student can create a gene strain in their basement that could have a major negative impact on the globe. AI. Albert Einstein had an IQ of about 160. AI will have an IQ over 1,000 within 2 or 3 years. Um, Other pandemics, we're not good at being proactive. We're much better at being reactive. The problem with that is that a long time ago, Mark Twain once said, "If the only way mankind can learn is through experience, I see no hope for mankind." Meaning that if the only way we can learn not to put our hand on the stove is by putting our hand on the stove, that assumes we're going to be around for a do-over that we can learn from. And a lot of this stuff we're facing, you don't get a do-over. You've got to have the wisdom and emotional intelligence not to put your hand on the stove before putting your hand on the stove. And we simply do not have that.
I know I see the book there. I just see the title of the author, Eckhart Tolle, and I've been a fan of Eckhart Tolle and read the Power of Now, and I know he's got a couple other ones, but of course became a fan of his work through Power of Now. And a lot of what you're saying is just sort of, for me, stands out big time around that ego, around that pain body, when folks really being so immersed in that. And I see that in business all the time. I think that I've been doing a lot of work, me personally, over the last few years, where I see the pain body pop up. I haven't gotten to the point where I can like suppress it or transcend it to where I can, sort of eliminate it popping up to begin with, but I do see it, and then I see all the processes that it kicks off: insecurity, anger, resentment, fight or flight. I mean, all these things, right? And this, within the context of work and business, can be triggered from an asynchronous Slack message, right? Or LinkedIn message, or something that is not even a standard sort of bi-directional conversation where I get a lot more context. We're now living in this world where we're communicating in these asynchronous technology-based methods that leave a lot of context out, right? And so if a mere text message or message can trigger all these responses, imagine what goes on even at a higher level with leaders, right? Business leaders who are trying to make business decisions, and the states of being that they're in, which I can't tell you how many times I've just sat there and I've tried to really empathize with folks that I've seen that I didn't agree with, but understanding that they were just not in a level of awareness and consciousness to not treat employees like resources or assets, to not think about things more long term. For example, in technology, there's been the last 2 years massive layoffs and all these things, right? And I think certainly there's cases where it needs to happen, right, from a pure economics and P&L's perspective, those sort of things, right? Money in the bank. But then there's also, I think, these knee-jerk fear-based reactions, and these leaders don't actually think about the impact that it's going to have to their brand, but also the states of being of their employees that end up not getting laid off, right? That have to stay there and continue to operate in that fear. And I've seen that and I've experienced that. And it's just this total lack of awareness. And then they see these very successful people who maybe have, are on the Forbes, richest people or whatever, doing these cutthroat things, or what I would call generally unconscious things. And because they have this stature, it's okay. Now, I'm not going to judge, I like to believe that I'm trying not to, but I do think that there are better ways of doing this.
Yep, there are.
How do we do it? How do we develop this emotional intelligence? How do we actually bring these conversations to the workplace so we could actually apply them and get rid of this idea? Because the fact of the matter rather is that we work generally 5 days a week, so the vast majority of our day to day is spent in these work environments, whether it's virtual
Yeah.
now or in person, right?
So let me spend the next 2 or 3 minutes outlining the root cause and solution to everything.
Let's do it.
What I'm about to say involves energy physics. And I've been proving what I'm about to say everywhere in the world for the last 23 years. And it's the way that statement becomes reality. What if you could guarantee your success in your career, success in your personal life, and success in your business? And what if you could guarantee that success would increase exponentially over time for the rest of your life? I'm going to show you right now in the next 2 or 3 minutes how to do that. So here goes. We're only actually conscious about 3 to 5% of the time. The rest of the time, we're relying on our unconscious habits to drive the bulk of our behavior and our results. And that's fine. But when we're born, we're not born with a conscious mind. We don't start to become conscious until we're about a year or so old. But we are born with an unconscious mind. And we immediately start wiring up our brain, creating the neural network pathways in order to survive, in order to fit in, get food, all of that. And a lot of those habits unconsciously cause us to give away our energy. And we do it in lots of different ways. How we communicate, listen, take responsibility, make decisions, all sorts of ways. But when we're unconsciously giving away our energy, it creates an energy deficit in us. So at the same time we're unconsciously giving away our energy over here, we have to be trying to replace that energy by trying to steal energy from other people over here. And that dynamic is going on inside of everybody, everywhere in the world, all the time, unconsciously. So what I do in the MBL program is I show people how they're unconsciously giving away their energy, and I give them better habits to practice to stop doing that. And when they stop giving away their energy, their need to steal the energy of other people goes away because they don't need it. And the results of that are the following. You become a more inspirational leader. You develop your emotional intelligence. You become more conscious of what's going on in you and around you. You become freer from your ego-based fears, which leads to higher levels of trust and engagement, which guarantees, underline, guarantees career, personal, and corporate success. So the results are remarkable. They're phenomenal. The barrier to getting those results is our resistance to change, is our resistance to do the emotional labor that change requires. So you have to have an emotional connection to a desired result that's greater than the fear that's going to get triggered in you when you move outside of your comfort zone in pursuit of that desired result. If you don't have that emotional connection, you may want better results than you're currently getting, but you simply will not be willing to do the emotional labor that getting better results requires. So that's the opportunity, that's the pathway, and that's the challenge to making those statements a reality.
And how do we sort of like integrate that into our leadership styles, especially in
There
a
is no
culture.
leadership style. If you need a title to get people to follow you, you're not a leader. If your actions don't inspire followers, you're not a leader. Leadership's not a position, it's a choice that
Mm,
we all need to make. We all need to become better leaders. See, we have these specialized brain cells because we've evolved from herds, tribes over hundreds of millions of years. We've had to develop the ability to sense whether somebody's trying to help us or eat us. So we have these specialized brain cells in our prefrontal cortex that brain scientists call mirror neurons. Your listeners can Google it. I call them bullshit meters. That's why when you walk into a room, you can sense the energy in the room. Or if you're having a conversation with somebody, you can sense whether they're trying to help you or hurt you.
mm,
So the more you learn to lower your walls, the more people will sense that they can lower their walls and be more of who they truly are around you. And that's what creates inspirational leadership.
mm. That really resonates with me. I mean, certainly for me, my experience with that comes to mind is when I meet a leader who's just, you talk about authentic, being that authentic leader who are just who they are. And in then it's a matter of what are they showing me to give me that indication outside of the energetic transmission, but just sort of behaviorally in the physical. um, and a lot of the time I think for me it's like a leader that will show me that they are, or I'm going to throw out the title of a leader, but just another fellow human that shows me that they're willing to be vulnerable, willing to express and show that they may be experiencing that pain or the discomfort or fear, but besides that are still willing to go to battle, right? Using that analogy, and for me
It's
that
not
really.
about going to battle, but you're right. Vulnerability is actually strength. What they're actually doing by lowering their walls is they're demonstrating love
Mm,
as opposed to ego based fear. See, our ego always wants us to feel superior or inferior, but it never wants us to feel equal. Our ego always needs somebody, the other, to battle against, to compare themselves against, so they can feel superior or inferior. Ego doesn't care which, but it's how we give away our energy,
mm.
and it's how we try and steal the energy of others. And as I say, all of that is going on inside of all of us, every single human on the planet, unconsciously. And so we have to become more conscious of how we're giving away our energy so that we can stop doing that. And that will fix everything.
You mentioned that the ego is the biggest expenditure for industry out there, hands down. So I think a lot of times, if you're not aware of this line of work or have that experience with it, you might say, what does that mean? Like, how could that actually be the case? What are some manifestations of the ego that really drive expenditures at work or within an
I'll give you
organization?
an example of how we unconsciously give away our energy, and I'll give you an example of a company that's currently valued at over $3 trillion, and they're doing about $600 billion a year in revenue. And their primary hiring focus is emotional intelligence.
Mm,
So here's an example of how we're unconsciously giving away our energy and what that creates. This is actually one of the MBL habits called authentic listening. And the key to authentic listening is not to take anything personally.
mm,
How somebody feels about you, whether they like you or whether they don't, has nothing to do with you. It has to do with what's going on inside of them. But if how you feel about yourself is based on how somebody else feels about you, who's running your life, you or them? Well, it's them, right? You're
Yeah.
giving away your energy to them to determine how you should feel about yourself. If you like me, I like me. If you don't like me, I don't like me. Now, as crazy as that might sound, what I've just described is all of social media. We bend over backwards trying to get people to like us so that we can feel better about ourselves. But you see, it doesn't end there. If we're giving away our energy to other people, it's also simultaneously triggering the need for us to be stealing the energy from others to replace the energy that we're unconsciously giving
Mm.
away. So that's just one example of how we're giving away and stealing the energy of other people all the time.
Unbelievable. Thank you so much, Phil. There's so much there, right? Like I'm sort of feeling the desire to say to Phil, give me the give me the answer, give me the answer. But to your point, like you really have to be able to be willing to put this work in,
Yep.
right? And what's so interesting is you mentioned personal life, and I know when I sort of mentioned the uh, this this notion that personal life and business life is separated. I saw you sort of smile there because I, uh, I think you perhaps you agree with me that it isn't separated in this notion, especially these days. Like I'm in my home office right now, and there's a phenomenon that I've experienced, which is now that I've been working from home, even pre this pandemic thing that happened here on Earth. I was working from home, and I guess it was a little different because I would also go into physical meetings and et cetera. I was constantly traveling, but after everything started to get locked down and I was just in here all the time, I started to actually observe like my ego just go completely insane with these narratives and stories that would start to be created, um, and so I would say that like this remote environment these days. Uh, is a requires a level of internal mastery that emotional intelligence that maybe the prior sort of paradigm of going into the office every day, although of course it still existed there. I find that like it just runs like even more wild while I'm by myself sitting in my office, literally generating these thoughts off of social media. Right, LinkedIn is where I'm at all the time given my industry as a in the tech world, and it's just this, I can see my emotions, Phil. It's just unbelievable, right? And so this really resonates, and I think it's like again, I said it earlier, I think it's the most important work we can do. If we can't generate this new skill, uh, I don't know how how anyone can really be successful, and if they are, be happy throughout the journey.
It even goes beyond that. You're right. Um, but because of the accelerating rate of global change we're facing, we're at a tipping point as a species on the planet. Um, we have to evolve. We have to change our trajectory dramatically starting in the next 10 to 15 years. Humanity, in relative terms, has been on the planet for less than half of 1 second. And in that time, we've destroyed the climate. There isn't a single other species on the planet that wouldn't be better off if humanity didn't exist. We're the virus on the planet. And our ego based fears and the drama, chaos, and conflict that triggers in us is simply unsustainable. Um, our educational system has failed us, and our employment system has failed us because it's focused primarily on our ability to do intellectual labor, and it's done nothing to develop our emotional intelligence. There was a 40-year study done at UC Berkeley comparing IQ with EQ, and they concluded that emotional intelligence was 400% more valuable in determining success than intellectual intelligence. So let me give you a little bit of a numeric example. Think of intellectual intelligence as somebody giving you $10,000 a day for 31 days. So at the end of 31 days, you've got $310,000. Think of emotional intelligence as a penny that doubles in value every day. So day one, you have a penny. Day two, you have 2 pennies. Day 31, you have $10.7 million. Day 40, you've got over 5 billion. Day 50, you've got over 5 trillion. See, not everybody can have 160 IQ. If you have a high IQ, your parents had a high IQ, their parents had a high IQ, and you simply inherited those genes. But everybody can develop their emotional intelligence by doing the emotional labor that requires, and the ROI is massively greater than intellectual intelligence. So as we move forward, especially with the growth in AI, which by the way is forecast to remove about 60% of jobs in the next 5 years, the focus is going to shift dramatically from a focus based on intellectual intelligence to a focus based on emotional intelligence. So that $3 trillion a year company that's doing over $600 billion a year in revenue is Apple. So their primary hiring focus is emotional intelligence. They want you to have a great experience, and maybe you'll tell your friends and they'll tell their friends. They're not trying to sell you anything. They're trying to understand your pain and, if possible, offer a solution to your pain. And if you think about it, that energy you feel, the way you feel in that environment, is a very different energy from the energy coming out of the stores surrounding that environment. So that's an example of a more emotionally intelligent environment. And because of the accelerating rate of global change, more and more companies are hiring, developing, and promoting largely based on emotional intelligence. It represents the future of individual and organizational change.
Awesome. Well, Phil, thank you so much, really, for bestowing your wisdom. And I know I mentioned in our prep that I want to be able to be as helpful as possible to share this message. For me, it's a very spiritual message as well. And of course, what is spirituality? That's another conversation. But if folks want to learn more about your program and start to, develop this emotional intelligence that they can apply to their businesses, which ultimately, as we know, will improve their personal lives. What are some good URLs or channels to go and learn and potentially sign up?
I'll give you a link to my Zoom calendar, and if anybody would like to continue the conversation with me, they can just jump on my calendar, and I'd be happy to meet with them.
Awesome. Well, Phil, thank you so much for your time and your work here for humanity, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, George. Thank you. I appreciate the work you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you.